Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Universal podcast, where we're interested in all things DEI, employee enablement, and then so much more. Today, we're joined by Sophie Morris, team operations consultant and business psychologist. Welcome, Sophie.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, Erica.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. And this has been a long time in the making. We've been trying to get together and do this for a while. So I'm glad we can finally do this. But for our guests, I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more about your background and what has led you to where you are today.
Of course, absolutely. So I guess I'll start by saying hi, I'm Sophie, and I was very much that career girl, like climbing the corporate ladder, and I did that and had a wonderful career going through the recruitment industry, progressing into head of L&D and people roles, which I loved, and I also qualified as a business psychologist. And then I think, like many other people, during the pandemic, I started to feel like I could do something a little bit different, still related, but I felt like I wasn't serving as many people as I could, just being in one particular corporate job. So I really wanted to help other businesses, maybe smaller businesses who don't have the capacity often to have their own internal people function. So that's when I started my consultancy. And as you said, now I'm a team ops consultant. So I work with founders to help them make sure they've got everything they need in place to hire effectively, ensure performance, have a happy, engaged workforce, basically, and everything in between.
Absolutely. And when I asked you to kind of complete this onboarding form that we have a lot for our guests, you mentioned that 2% of females that you're helping, is it 2% of females that hit 7+ figures in their business to scale by optimizing their people operations? Literally. I mean, that's a great mission.
Yeah, I know. I'm actually part of a mastermind that I joined because I know we're going to talk about learning and development a lot today. And I think my passion for that has stemmed from my passion of learning personally. So I've invested probably the most I've ever invested myself over the last couple of months. And I've joined this mastermind, and it's all about working with women who aren't hitting more than 7 figures. Because as you said, it's only 2%. And when I heard that, I thought, how? Like that. That cannot sit right, particularly in 2024. So yeah, I'm very much working as well now with female founders to make sure that they're able to scale and grow a business to 7 figures beyond through their people.
That's great. And I love that message of actually, sometimes just looking at your own people can help to bring more into your business, whether you are a startup, but also for an organization. But when we're talking about, as you said, L&D, what is it that excites you about that work? Is it the optimizing people piece?
I think so. Yeah. I think if nothing else, I tried to pick this apart personally and see where does this come from? And I genuinely believe that we all have unlimited potential. And I find it so triggering personally when I see someone who isn't using that to their full advantage. And I've seen that time and time again in the workplace where maybe imposter syndrome comes up, or feelings of just not being confident, or being newer to a role and feeling like I can't possibly know how to do this well yet because there's some sort of time bound nature that we put on ourselves. And so for me, learning and development has always excited me because yes, I'm the lifelong learner, but I love to see that in other people, those aha moments, and to be the one that facilitates that just mindset shift that someone can have. I genuinely think it's just magical.
Yeah, I'm a lifelong learner as well. I can't help it. You'll see in the background I've got loads of kind of textbooks
they
for
almost
history.
Color coded as well.
Yeah, that's because they are color coded. So I just wanted to ask you, Sophie, with the rapid technological advancements that we're seeing at the moment, and there's a constantly changing landscape for businesses at the moment. How is the role of learning and development evolving with that?
It's pretty crazy, to be honest. So I went to an event last September, and they were talking all about the metaverse. And I was like, what? I don't think I've ever sat somewhere and felt so old and out of touch, because my head was like, how do we do this? But I was so intrigued, so curious, and so like my brain started to think, how on earth do we make this happen? What can we do? And then I started to think, okay, well, how do organizations use this? Because there's a hell of a learning curve in that. There's some sort of acceptance that would need to happen. There's getting people in a classroom sometimes certain managers aren't a fan of, let alone sending people to some sort of metaverse. I think I don't feel like it's going to be an immediate shift, but it's coming. And I think that's exciting. I think because 71% of learning and development professionals actually think that it's going to go more down the route now of learning in the metaverse and in VR and augmented reality. So definitely, if it's not on your L&D agenda, not that you necessarily can do anything with it yet if you're not that advanced, but I would definitely be thinking about what is it? How are other people using it? So
I mean, my question is how much do people use technology currently? Is it a big thing in L&D?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think you can outweigh the benefits that you get when you bring people together to learn in a classroom. Or for me, one of the most beneficial things I did in my learning programs was get people to do stuff, what we call in the flow of work. So when people are doing the things that they're meant to be doing, there's no better time really to learn than then. I think it's 70% of learning's on the job, 20% from your peers, 10% in the classroom. But there is something about bringing people together, particularly people at different levels, that can kind of learn from each other too. So there is that. But tech 100% makes that much, much enhanced. So if we think about when we were all working remotely, being able to do that via things like Teams and Zoom and use breakout rooms, that was really important. Now we've got things like ChatGPT and AI. So I know there's one company actually that offers a training kind of catalogue. You can log in and you can go through bite-sized training modules. And then you can also now use their AI tool to ask a question and it will come back with an answer. And I think that is fantastic because that really personalizes that online journey, where sometimes it can feel a little bit like a computer versus me. There's now interaction between the two, and I'm not going to get into a debate about like the whole AI thing. I think we have to be careful with that. And I actually I was talking to a client and we were testing out, okay, what content would I put together versus what would ChatGPT put together? And they were actually very different. And what I noticed was my content was much more focused around, yes, you need to learn these things, but how do we get a behavior change?
Yes.
Whereas ChatGPT was much more about, this is the program, this is the content you should cover.
Yeah.
So definitely use it because it's good to for efficiency, but be mindful of some of the dangers with those things. But I think that AI and the whole personalizing a learning journey too, that's something that's coming through in tech. So having different modules on a platform and then having some sort of AI in the background that can push people to what relevant content is there for them, I think is very smart.
Absolutely. And I think the emphasis really is on AI and technology as a facilitator of the training, but you still need to have that kind of human-centric kind of training program with someone behind it like yourself who understands how to get that behavior change. So technology is a really interesting place to start. It was a bit of an odd place to start. But do you think that there are organizations of any level that are still not putting enough emphasis or priority on upskilling and developing the opportunities for their workers in-house?
Yes, I do. And it makes me sad. It makes me really sad. But everybody's got to run their business in a way that works for them. And I am pleased to say that on the whole, I see a lot more companies investing in training and development for sure. I think following the lead of companies like Google and Microsoft who do this very well, I think people are starting to see, okay, I need to offer this. And one of the biggest shifts in that for me that I've seen in my career is the way that you can attract better talent into your business if you have these programs, because people expect it now. So if you don't, very often you will lose out to another company that's maybe offering a similar job if they have a learning platform program development plan in place. But I think for the places that maybe don't recognize the value of it so much, the emphasis instead then is put on doing more. So I've been in situations before where maybe someone isn't performing very well, but rather instead of thinking, okay, is this a skill thing or is this a will motivational type thing, It's just, okay, you need to do more of this, without any understanding or appreciation as to why aren't they doing more already? Do they not understand how to do it? Like I say, the skill, is it the will thing that they just don't want to, or there's a imposter syndrome thing again, or a confidence block, or just something isn't very clear and it could be easily fixed. So I think sometimes in the places where learning isn't valued so much, the answer is, well, this works, just do that. And sometimes that's not enough.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you've kind of got the people who are responsible for kind of curating the programs, and if there's not an L&D person, it'll often fall to HR. And then you have like the line management itself of actually recognizing where the performance is. So actually, it's a really interesting dynamic going on there.
I know. Yeah, interesting is one word. I think it stems from, I think L&D, HR, like all those people functions historically were very much a separate function. They would normally sit in a headquarters, still do in a lot of places, but they're very detached from the sales floor or, the department store, or whatever the situation is in the business. And over the last, I'd say at least 5 years, I've seen a huge shift where L&D and the people function need to become not an extension of the business, but they need to partner. So it worked best for me, and the advice I always give is when you have these people in your business, to bring them into your strategy conversations, to partner with them on at least a monthly basis, I would be saying weekly, about your team. Because the amount of times I would coach someone or speak with someone in a team and get information that was so helpful to a manager to do something with, they wouldn't ever have found that out without that kind of different relationship often. But L&D really needs to become the business partner to the business, and then from there making sure that whatever initiatives are put in place are ones that align back to business strategy, to make sure that there's a conversation that's two-way between L&D to a line manager, for example, and vice versa, so that you can work together to solve whatever the problem may be.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's that collaborative culture and the alignment with the business objectives that I hope we can kind of dig into a little bit more. But before we do, I suppose it's probably a good idea to explain why companies should be prioritizing learning and development. Why?
Why? Good question. So the LinkedIn Learning Report actually said that 94% of employees are more likely to stay somewhere if there is training and a learning program. So that's reason number one. I think people definitely feel more invested. I think people feel better able to perform, and often do perform better because they're getting invested in skill sets that maybe they don't already have, or they get improved. Off of the back of that will also increase. So what I've seen, again, unfortunately, is you can hire into a team, and then maybe there's not quite the support there that's needed, like a very strong induction or onboarding program. And then what will happen is that person will leave. And then that line manager's back to square one, where they've actually wasted time and money now developing that person to a point where they're going to leave anyway. And all of the costs through the hiring and everything, that's just redundant now, and they've got to start again. So having that strong induction, that onboarding piece is so vital to retain the people. And then plus, when you do start somewhere, normally you do get invested in that way, and then there's nothing. So people lose people at that kind of itchy moment. Maybe it's 7 to 9 months perhaps, where people are like, okay, well, I think I know what I'm doing now, but what's the next challenge? So there needs to be a continuous learning program and culture too that keeps people engaged. But retention generally is improved when you have a learning and development function. And then you've got obviously your leadership development too, making sure that you've got a culture of learning for your leaders that can filter down through the organization, plus they can get better. Because in a lot of the places I've worked, the managers become managers because they're great at their role, and then don't get the development into being a great leader. So they're just expected to now be a manager and have that skill set, but they've got no training and support for that. So again, investing in your team in terms of your leaders can also improve their retention then, if they know they're going to go on some sort of development plan. I mentioned earlier too about the increased talent attraction. So you're more likely to find some very great talent for your business. And it's also been shown to increase innovation and creativity too, because I think people start to get into this kind of learning culture where it is more collaborative and ideas generally are shared. And I think this has been shown at Microsoft and Google too with what they do. And something I think magical happens when you connect peers. So in the programs I used to run, when I worked for a global organization, I would get people together from all over the world where time zones allowed. And there's something really great about building that community of people who are very similar, who may not be connected, but have something in common, that they get to learn from each other. And again, that enhances then the culture of the organization too. So yeah, there's countless benefits. I've got even more to share than that, but I think they're the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I think all of those are kind of business priorities for a lot of people. And actually the culture, though a byproduct of L&D, is also what the goal is, for a lot of organizations. If you want, like you said, with the Microsofts and the Googles of the world, you want kind of creativity and innovation to be a part of your culture. But if you're not providing a space where people can challenge themselves, where they can upskill themselves in different areas and provide those opportunities to progress their career, then that's not necessarily aligned, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something in that too, that when you have a learning culture like you've just described, people I think are more willing, and this is like a controversial topic, more willing to fail. So actually having a culture that allows you to fail, it sounds so counterproductive, doesn't it? But those businesses and those organizations are so much more successful because maybe 10 ideas aren't great, but the 11 is the game changer. So it doesn't need to be a massive thing that means the company's going to go bust or anything. But having a culture where someone's like, yeah, give that a go. Or, when you make that next call, do it in that way and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we try something else. But having the culture of learning, and if the leaders can drive that, that's so powerful.
Absolutely. I'm 100% on board with this. So when we start talking about kind of effective methods for identifying and perhaps analysing the learning needs within an organisation, because it might be different, I imagine, for different organisations, where do people begin? If we're talking about a people leader in an organisation, whether it's HR or someone new given this responsibility of L&D, where do they start?
Good question. And I'm so glad you've asked this question, because very often it's not asked at all. And very often what people will do is go, I think we need a course on this. Run it. And that's such a waste of time, because you don't even know if that's fixing, you don't know what the underlying issue is. So I would say the analysis starts at kind of that higher level where we're thinking about what are the outcomes, what are the goals for a business of a particular, say, financial year or quarter or whatever it looks like. And then looking at how is performance against those right now, where are we at, where are we tracking against those. And then from there, you should hopefully start to identify through some of the data research, plus maybe some of the conversations and the feedback, where are those things maybe not happening and why. And then from there, I would be picking apart, okay, this is where we need to be. This is where we are. What's the gap? And explore that gap. And then in that conversation, you decide, is training the answer or not? Because it could be a coaching conversation. It could be a training program. It could be a system and a process problem, and it's actually not a training thing at all right now. So I'd be picking apart first, where do we think there's a gap? And then deciding what the right solution is, because I can tell you now, training is definitely not always the answer. But if training is the answer, then I would be going around and data gathering then once I know, okay, this is the problem. I don't know, let's say customer service. This is the I'm just picking something very simple. This is the issue. So let's talk. This is the other thing that doesn't often happen. Let's talk to the people who are responsible for that thing to see what they think is working and not. Because again, when L&D works in silo, we'll decide for ourselves, it's probably this. They just need to know that. And that's where that ChatGPT thing can come in. You go, write me a program on customer service, but you don't know it's addressing the actual pain points. So I would gather from the actual people who are in that position, what works, what doesn't. You don't have to use all of those suggestions, but what you've also done now is gain buy-in. So when you do run that program, you've hopefully got people who are like, oh yeah, I was part of building this, I'm very invested in this, I want to go on this because I know it's going to be great. So I think I would deliver it that way and make sure that you have your metrics as a benchmark too, so that you can deliver the whatever it is and come out the other side and see, has that made a difference? Because that is one of the hard things in L&D, is being able to say, has this moved the needle or not? So always have some kind of metrics that you can gather pre-training that you can then go look at post.
Yeah, no, that's all really important. And actually, a lot of the conversations we've had around culture have been about identifying the problem first and kind of digging deep as to, okay, so why is that problem occurring? And then you can start to strategize, you know, how you then want to proceed with, is this an L&D problem, as you said? Is it going to be, you know, a systems process problem? So I think that's, for any person, any business, I should say, a great place to start. And what do you think are some of the common problems that L&D professionals or people who have this responsibility face when it comes to kind of executing these programs?
Yeah, there can be a lot, I think. I think depending on how learning and development has been perceived in the business previously, if it has been very much and it's no one's fault, it was just very much an old way of doing things, was, we'll build a course, we'll run it, it's in a classroom, people go away, they come back, it worked or it didn't. It's that kind of vibe. And it shouldn't be like that anymore. And I'm hoping it hasn't been like that for a long time, but it probably is in some places. So instead, it's L&D realigning itself, as I said, to become like the strategy partner of a business to improve productivity and drive performance. That's what L&D should be doing. And in line with that, increasing profits. That's what the purpose should be. So I think one of the challenges is getting that buy-in in the first place. If you're working with leaders or the audience that you have who aren't bought into learning or have had bad experiences before, you need to win them back around. I think if you're just doing things in a classroom, that feels old school now. I think sending people away somewhere to some sort of room with no windows feels old school now. You know, there's retreats happening now. I went on one in April when I invested in myself, and I'm, you know, in Malibu. Now, I'm not saying everybody's going to do that, but, you know, is there a different way that a business can make, if it has to be a learning day, could it be offsite in a little bit more of a dynamic environment that really gets people passionate and, you know, engaged about whatever it is you're talking about? Or is it something that can be done globally, as I said, so you get to meet more people and have more communication and build more of a community? Is there a learning platform that you can invest in so people can own their learning, and there's some sort of hybrid between, we'll do stuff face to face and we'll do stuff, you know, in your own time, on demand, that personalized training that I mentioned. So that can be a challenge. The whole remote thing can be a challenge. People are very standoffish, I think, to learning remotely compared to in the classroom, including the facilitators. But it can be done well and it can be done right, and breakout rooms are great, but you just have to be familiar with how to do that well, because you can't run a whole day virtually like that because you're feeling people out. Another challenge, I think, like I mentioned earlier, is the whole measurement piece. It's in a time where maybe people are thinking quite frugally, if that's a word, and thinking about budgets and whatnot. L&D really has to fight to show how it adds value. And if you're not gathering the data and the metrics, it's very hard to do that, which is why I said, like, always gather some stats and some data up front so that you can show the impact that you're having, because L&D can very rarely say this was because of us. But you can say, this is where we were, this is what we did, this is where we are now. And hopefully that's made a positive shift.
Yeah, and I think all of what you've just said kind of just points to really redefining the position of L&D in the organisation, and it's really the big challenge for an L&D kind of position is to reshift it, is to get that buy-in, to justify a program and the money and resource spent you know into producing that, and as you say, metrics is so important. Those measurements, even the baseline, is super important to start with. So all I think emphasizing the importance of L&D, but also, you know, how difficult sometimes it might be to reshift that.
And it really can. And I think the easiest way to shift that, if I can say, is just be in the conversations about the business performance. Because if you randomly come up and say, I think I've noticed this and I think we should run a training on it, that's not as powerful as saying, this is where we want to get to, this is the goal of the business, this is what's currently happening because I've observed it, this is what I would suggest we do about it. It's very different. So the more you can align with just the business strategy and work that backwards, the more buy-in you should get, because it's genuinely going to make a difference.
Yeah, well, that answers my next question, because I was going to say how, but that's absolutely fine. Beyond the traditional training programs, as we've kind of already mentioned, there's other things that leaders can be doing to kind of foster that continuous learning and development within their organization. Are there any kind of like fun, creative things that people might consider doing that is slightly different but effective?
That's a good question. So to build that learning culture.
Yeah, I suppose it's a question of just that employee engagement piece. As you said, like there's a lot of work. You can hear my cat meowing out the door. Sorry, sorry guys, you'll probably hear my cat meowing outside. He'll go away in a minute.
Oh, you can probably hear my dog.
It's fine. We'll carry on. Animals. This is the only thing about working from home. But as I was going on to say, you know, the remote workforce and the hybrid workforce is a huge challenge to keep employees engaged in a general sense. So perhaps there's something there about, you know, the different ways to keep the employees engaged.
Yeah, for sure. This is a really nice question. I've seen some really good things. So one thing that I did was there's a Learning at Work week every May time. And when I was with one of my corporate jobs, we were global. And I was thinking, what can we do for Learning at Work week? And I thought I could keep it very specific to what the business was. So it's a recruitment role that the consultants had. And I thought it could be all about recruitment, but I thought, gosh, surely they do this all the time. Like, let's do something else. So I actually sent out an email and I said, if you've got a super skill or something you love, I really want you to get in touch with me. And then what I ended up doing was putting together a week-long program of very random sessions that people could dial into from anywhere. So we had a guy in London who was teaching us how to make these gorgeous like spring rolls. We had someone in the US who knew a lot about blockchain that he wanted to share. We had someone who'd actually created a short film and won an award, so who's telling you how to like write well. And
that's
how
so cool.
Yeah, so it was just thinking like everybody in your business has a personal story too, not just how and what they do at work. And I thought, how great would it be to bring some of that to the forefront? And then you're still fostering that culture of learning because that whole week was dedicated to learning. Now, you wouldn't have to do a week like that all of the time, but if you peppered some of that in over a couple of months or something, that could be a really fun thing to do.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating and really cool, because I'm just like, we're constantly talking about, if you want to build an inclusive culture, what's one of the first things that you need to do? Okay, so ERGs and employee resource groups, business resource groups are, one of the first steps that a lot of businesses do. But actually, this is almost in line with that. You're almost going, let's do a week of learning based on the interests of our people, and it demonstrates not just this lifelong learning, but it's also we're interested in you as people, and it fosters that kind of loyalty between the two, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it just says like you said, we're interested in you and we want to share the same passions as you, and then actually off the back of that, people connected with people they hadn't before because they actually realized they had the same interest. But one thing I will say was important about that is I didn't make it mandatory, because I think as soon as you do that, you take the fun out. And then there was something about the build up. So another top tip, I guess, is having a campaign. So I made sure that there was, something with a month leading up to it, that it was like, we're going to be doing this. This is going to be fun. You're going to want to join. you don't have to, but look what you're going to miss out on type of vibe, which I think worked much better than if we like, it's learning at work week, next week you have to be at all these things.
Yeah.
So I think, just people want to be treated like adults. So in your learning culture, how do you develop that? How do people know what's available so that you don't have to tell them, but they proactively go, oh, I saw we do this course. Can I go on it? When's it running again? Watching your leaders do that too. So you can see like, okay, we're allowed time for learning here. Like, what can I do? I think the more the leaders can share and promote that, okay, this would be really great for you. So if somebody's not performing in a certain area, it doesn't become a horrible conversation, but it becomes, this isn't quite working. I know we know that together, but look what we can do. Yeah. Let's get you on this or this, and there's some sort of support available, I think is key.
I think it just all points to having that collaborative relationship between those departments, those partnerships, because from all that you've said, I'm thinking, okay, so actually they're going to need operations involved if there's like an intranet and, marketing to perhaps help run that campaign or to, so it's really, I think what's coming out of this for me is that partnership within a business is essential. Yes. So then when we start to think about those measurements, measuring the success or the ROI of a learning and development program, what kind of things should organizations be looking for?
Yeah, this is another good question. And I think this is one of the bigger challenges of L&D, and relating to what we were just saying, where you said operations and marketing and everything, I just wanted to say very often in some businesses, those functions won't exist either. So L&D will have to become the marketers of their programs, and they will have to become the ops who create the platforms too. So I think being kind to yourself in this role is important as well. But to answer the analytics question, which is the other challenge of being in L&D, I think those pre-metrics again are very important. Setting objectives is key. So having an objective for every program and every module within that program allows you to measure, is this hitting what it should or not? Because again, taking that customer service example, I could probably write a customer service training in 10 different ways. So I need to understand, where are we at so that we can build a program that aligns to the need and then get the return on investment out of that. Otherwise, a non-tailored, off-the-shelf kind of customer service program may not hit the nail on the head, and then the ROI is zero, and everybody now thinks training is rubbish, training's a waste of time, that doesn't work. But it's just because we didn't align the program to what's happening. So the first is always to just make sure you work from the outcome you want backwards. Then I think gathering feedback, something again that can be very, very difficult. Your first thought then was probably those like tick sheets, like, how great was this? Yay!
On a scale of 1 to 5.
Yeah, literally. Now they are important, like that whole Kirkpatrick model thing. It is important, but you can get so much deeper. Like I would, when something is so vital and I want to make sure that there is return on investment, I will speak with the people who I imagine aren't going to be very bought in before the program starts, to understand what would make this worthwhile for you. What would you want to see? What outcomes would you need to get from going on something like this to say there's return on your investment of time? Because it's not just the money in the business, but it's the time of the person away from their job if they are. Yeah. And then at the end of the programs, I would be conducting similar kind of focus groupy type conversations with the group to see, how was that? What could have been improved? If it's a longer program, you can do this throughout to make sure that you can change and tweak things as you go as well, to make sure that you're getting that feedback. Because as a trainer or a facilitator, sometimes you're like, oh, I don't want to know. I'm just going to run it and pretend it was all great. But without that feedback, you're not going to know if it has had a return on investment, and you don't want to run it again if it didn't without changing it. And then you can obviously do things like calculating the direct and indirect costs of somebody being away from their desk if they are, or if it's off-site in a venue and you've got costs associated with it, you can do that as well. But for me, it's just, are we clear on what we're trying to get out of it, and did it move the needle or not?
Great stuff. And We've kind of already covered the essential steps, but is there anything else exciting or important that you think HR leaders and people or L&D leaders should be considering before they embark on a program?
Yeah, I think it's just that question I said, is training the answer?
Yeah.
That's the first place to start, because it genuinely might not be. Like I say, it could be the process thing, it could be a coaching thing, it could be just a team meeting that could, fill a gap.
Yeah.
It could be that messages haven't flown or flowed past where they were meant to, so people weren't aware how they were meant to be doing things, and it just needs to be unblocked in terms of the communication. But if someone decides, yes, it is training, again, work with the business, understand the outcomes, build it in a way that aligns to that. And then the fun, exciting bit is building the program. So don't just think it has to be, a 1 day thing or a 1 hour thing. How can this really work so that it leads to change? This is the exciting thing for me. So if we think, okay, it's just going to be not just, but if it's a classroom thing, people will go, people will come back, nothing changes, say. How do we not let that happen? That is where I would be brainstorming, thinking, okay, how do we make this a fun program that engages people? And people can do that by thinking about some of the things they've been to. Like, I love Tony Robbins, and he gets people up and about and doing stuff. So why do people have to sit down while they're learning? Can they get up and about and do something different? Is there, rather than, taking a specific scenario and applying something, is there a out of the box way of thinking about something, and then you lead people to the same message, I think there's good ways to do that. Can you find who's the best at this in your business and get them to talk about it? Because that's going to get a lot more buy-in than someone who, so for me, I hadn't been a recruitment consultant for a long time by the point I was training later on. So who is more engaging to listen to from that point of view? Is it me, or is it the £1 million biller? So, get them in and get them talking, and, do some sort of Q&A or something like that. I just think big picture. How can you make this as engaging and as fun? Because when people have fun, not a waste of time fun, but when people have fun and are engaged, that's when learning happens, because the pathways change in your brain, if you're going to get all scientific about it. But that emotion that people apply to things, it sticks with you more. I can remember things that have stuck with me in my heart and my head that I've learned much more, like storytelling and that sort of thing. That sticks with me than a PowerPoint that I can't remember.
Yeah. No, absolutely, yeah. And I think, even in schools, we know that there has to be that differentiation in how you kind of approach or attract the attention of multiple students within a class. It's different ways of learning, it's different learning levels. So it's why can't we just apply that into the workplace?
And they should. I used to do a lot with learning styles, and I know there's a lot of debate about learning styles, but I think regardless of where you stand on it, you want to make sure you have a mix of them. So you've got your visual, you've got your audio, you've got your kinesthetic, like getting people to just do something, and then having something for everyone across that. Because if you just cater to one, you may be really doing the others a disservice.
Absolutely. So we're slowly running out of time, but you have a newsletter called The Huddle, and you have STM Power Hour. Do you want to tell us a little bit about those and how people can get involved?
Thank you. Yeah, so I share a weekly newsletter with all of these sorts of insights and tips across hiring, performance management, developing your culture, your team, your leadership style, all of that stuff that somebody may need. And I built it specifically, as I said, for those founders of businesses who probably won't have their own in-house function. And so that power hour that you mentioned is a strategy session. So somebody is working on something specific in one of those areas right now. Then we sit down for an hour and we go through specifically like what's going to have the most impact, to get an action plan and a week extra support with me if you've listened to this podcast.
Awesome stuff. It sounds really exciting and really valuable, as you say, with the different tips and insights, and especially for people who perhaps don't have those in-house teams, especially I know a lot of organizations who don't have that manpower in those spaces. But as we've spoken throughout this podcast, actually the value of investing in your own people is immeasurable, or it should be measurable. Actually, no, we'll say that. So, just one last question for you, Sophie. Do you have one last piece of advice that you would like to give to our listeners?
I will say, keep it simple, keep it fun.
I love that.
The more that you maybe sometimes fuss around with things and think it needs to be perfect and this and that, just make something, align it to the goals, get it out there. You can tweak and play with it and measure its effectiveness and improve all of the time. But just think what's going to change behavior.
Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for this last hour, and also for all of your insights and for all of the tips that you've shared. I'm sure there's so much more that we could get into, and perhaps we might need to book another session. But for people listening, we'll be providing all of the links that Sophie has given us into the podcast description. So if you would like to get in touch, like to follow the newsletter, like to register for an hour with Sophie going through your strategy, then all of the links will be there for you to follow those and connect. And for those of you listening, check out the UWI's next event coming to you very, very soon. We hope to see you there. Sophie, it's been wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for facilitating this conversation. It's so important.